So far in our course, we've really concentrated on vertical presentation, and at this point, it's time to talk about tables, which allow us to do presentations that are not just vertical, but tabular or horizontal, or really whatever it is that we want. We're going to cover the syntax of tables, and we're also going to cover how to apply CSS to tables to make them a little more attractive. Open your examples folder and open the tables folder within that. We'll start with tablessimple.html. Bring it into your editor, and while you're at it, go ahead and bring it up in a browser. That's a table, and as you see, it's got title at the top, which is actually called a caption in XHTML, and it's got column headings, and then it's got the columns and the data itself. Looking in the XHTML file, you have the table tag, which is a container, and it contains the entire table all the way down to the bottom. There's the bottom of the table. And within that table, you have the caption, which corresponds to this element here on the page. And then you have the headings, which are in a row. TR specifies a row, and that is that entire container. And then it has 3 cells with the TH element specifying that they are heading cells, which basically just makes them formatted different. In this case, they're bold and centered, which is pretty much the same thing that they do also in Mozilla. Let's go ahead and bring this up in Mozilla as well so you can see that. More or less the same presentation there. There are some differences, but it's the same general idea. And then each row of the table is specified by TR container and the TD elements within that. And the TD elements are the actual table cells. So here's the actual table cells, and they're all within a row. Sometimes it's easier to see the layout of a table if you set the border attribute to 1. That creates a little border around the elements of the table so that you can see the layout of the table a little bit better. Some people will even leave it this way on their web pages. There's a few things about the default layout of the table that I don't like, and I've corrected that here in this HTML, one of them here, the v-align equals top. If I take that out, you can see what happens here, and I just took it out in this one row, that natural vertical alignment of these table cells is centered, and since this one wraps, it leaves these centered, and it would do the same to these and to this one. I find that, I don't know, it just doesn't look right to me. And so I always, almost as a matter of course, when I write a table, I set v-align equals top in all my rows. And I sort of make that my personal default. It works for me most of the time. Sometimes I have to change it. But that's just a choice that somebody made at some point that just doesn't work for me, that's all. So take the border back off of the table, and we can look again at the default layout of the table. And, just off the top, I see a lot of problems with it. It's hard to tell what associates with what, and these headings just look like they're out in the middle of nowhere, and the caption doesn't really look right, and we could do a lot of things in this XHTML to fix that, but it's almost not worth it. It would take so much when it's so easy to do it with style sheets. So let's just take a moment and look at a style sheet version of this table. Go ahead and open that in Internet Explorer. This is one that I've formatted with style sheets, and it didn't take a lot of work. And yet it looks nice. The data naturally associates with each other. I've got alternating white and gray. Got a little border around it. I've got my caption formatted. I've got my column headings formatted. And it all just looks a lot better. Take a look at the XHTML for this. It's almost exactly the same. I no longer have those v-align equals top on my table rows because I've got style sheets for them. And I've got alternating ones have a gray class. And so alternating rows have that. And if I had a program that was generating these, it would be easy for the program just to know every other one to set that class equals the gray class. And all the rest of it, I haven't even had to, I have set the class for the artist, title, and comment columns. There is a facility in XHTML to do that on a column-wide basis, but it doesn't work in all browsers, unfortunately. And that's the call group tag. And so I just do it on each cell, and it's not that much work. I set the class. That's these classes here that have a slightly different color, or the italic for the title. Now let's take a moment and look at the CSS for this. It's really very straightforward. The body sets the defaults for the entire page. I've got the background is white, font family Tahoma, which I like, but if you don't have that, you'll get your default sans serif. And the font size is 80% because, with tabular data, you want to fit, as much data as you can on the page, but you don't want to totally take over the client's browser. And if they don't like the 80%, they can easily hit the Control+, which works in most browsers, to just make it a little bit bigger. Look at that. It doesn't work in this one. Text size. See. There's an easy way to do that, and most people know where those things are in their browsers. So I like to get a little extra data in a table sometimes, and I'll set the font size a little smaller, but I don't do it in an absolute way because that totally takes over the client's browser. The table itself is formatted with a border around it, and that sets the border style. You got border width, border style is solid. Border color is a light gray, and that has that little border around it. I just think it makes it look nice. You don't have to do that. And then I have this gray style, which just sets a gray background. That's all that does, and that's for the alternating rows. The headings are aligned left and bold. You remember the original headings were centered, and they just don't line up right. They just look a little bit extra dumb to me. And so I have them aligned to the left, and I have them bold, and I have them in just a slightly off-white color. They're a little bit gray. You can see that. I might make them just a little bit grayer. And that makes them a little bit grayer. Then the actual data cells, again, I have that font size equals 80%, which actually makes that a little bit smaller. I might take that out and see what that does. Yeah, that looks a little big on this browser, but I've got the font set big because of recording, so I might just leave that like that. And then vertical line equals top. That's my major peeve. And then a little bit of padding on the left and a little bit of padding on the right. If I take that out, take a look at what happens. It just gets all the way jammed over to the left there and jammed over to the bottom on the descenders on the letters. And I just think that looks a little bit off to me. And so I go ahead and I put in this padding. And that just sets a little bit of extra space, below the descenders and to the left of the letters. And it just makes the data look a little bit more inside the actual table cells. And I just like the way that looks. And so, this is all just very flexible and it's easy to do. Once we have all of that set, I can set my gray backgrounds and I can set, a little bit of extra style for the artist title and comment columns. And, you don't have to do that, but I've got a little bit of that violet color for the artists. Italic just seems right to me for titles, and the comments, are just a little bit bluish. And that, I don't know, that might be a little too bluish. I can make it a little less bluish with 3s instead of 6s. You get to know the colors after a while with the hexadecimal. You've got the first 2 digits are red, the second 2 digits are green, the last 2 digits are blue, and you just get a feel for mixing them. I know they're a little bit off from the primary colors that you learned in school. Those are reflective colors. These are projected colors, and so the color wheel is a little bit different. If you're interested, my wife wrote an interesting article about that she has on her website at leeharrington.com that she talks about the 2 different color models for the projected color and reflected color, because when we were in school, we learned the color wheel, and that was really not the only color wheel. And we deal so much more with projected light today than we did at least when I was in school, because we didn't have computer monitors on our desks when I was in school. As a matter of fact, we only had black and white televisions at home, tell you how old I am. So it's good to also learn this color wheel, and as you deal with these hexadecimal values, you'll get to know it. That's how you gussy up a table with CSS style sheets, and how you can make tabular data look nice without just having to get all complex about it. I mean, this is pretty decently organized table here. It doesn't have a lot of extra stuff around it to handle the formatting. That's all in the CSS, which is also nicely organized. And this, I think, shows you a lot about the power of both tables and CSS. Now, we're going to cover one more subject on tables in our next lesson, and that'll be about using tables to align graphical elements on the page.